I'm sure you know about Uber drivers. How about an Uber pilot? We have a fascinating guest who flies a Boeing 747 jumbo jet and acts just like an Uber pilot. Stay tuned on Aviation Intrigue and find out a lot more.
This is Aviation Intrigue.
Doug, welcome to the program. I used to fly the jumbo jet 747s a lot as a passenger. I thought most passenger airlines retired that. Is that not true?
That's true. Most airlines have retired the 747, but it's still alive and well in the cargo industry.
And there are also a couple of airlines still continue to fly a few routes with a 747.
There are a few airlines which still require the capacity, and they use the 74 on long haul routes, but it has been mostly retired, as you say.
So it's fascinating. So you fly a 747, but in a different way than an airline would. So tell us a little bit about your world.
In our world, the 747 is used for a variety of missions. So we use it to carry cargo, we use it to carry passengers, we use it for special missions as well. So it's well used in a number of roles.
Okay, so you fly both cargo sometimes, so you have an airplane but sometimes there are actually passengers.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's difficult to explain exactly what it is that we do because we fill a number of roles with the aircraft.
Yeah, but you're different than a traditional airlines that people would think of, like flying a United Airlines and things like that. You guys work in a slightly different world.
Absolutely. Our world is sometimes referred to as ACMI, which is an acronym that simply means that the aircraft, crew, maintenance, and insurance are all included in a package, and then a customer seeks the package out. In a way, it's sort of like Uber.
Yeah, and I mentioned that before. And so a client can use the aircraft with you as a pilot in there. So you get the aircraft and the pilot together to do whatever mission that they choose to do.
Absolutely.
I was not very aware of this, even though I'm in the aviation world, which means that most people who are only peripherally interested in aviation probably don't know much about it. And sounds like you guys fly international long haul routes. That's kind of the bread and butter.
The industry is a bit of a mixed bag. We do a little of everything, but I would say with this aircraft, just entirely long haul is our focus. Although occasionally we will do an hour and a half flight from one destination to another, which can be quite strange in an airplane that's capable of flying for 18 or more hours.
Is 747s the primary fleet, or do you guys have other kind of aircraft in the fleet?
Throughout the industry, you'll find airplanes from 727s and DC-8s all the way up to 747s. So there's a number of airplanes that fill this role, although I specifically fly almost all variants of the 747.
That's interesting. And I assume that's because 747s have very large carrying capability and it's got wide body and everything conducive to carrying a lot of freight and also a lot of passengers on these special missions.
It's the only airplane that can possibly do the job asked of it, from its ability to carry almost 1 million pounds of stuff into the air to its ability to open its nose, almost like a clamshell, to allow cargo to fill the airplane. It's really the only aircraft that can do this.
I mentioned that I used to fly 747. That used to be one of my favorite aircraft. Obviously, I'm not a 747 pilot. I'm not even a jet pilot. So it must be fascinating to fly up front. But as a passenger, I love that experience, especially on the upper deck in the 747-800. It was an experience like nothing else at that time.
The airplane is beautiful to see from a distance, and the closer you get, the more beautiful it becomes. I feel it's really an outlier among airplanes.
So my understanding is that in a 747, actually the cockpit is actually on the second upper deck. So how far are you from, let's say, the runway surface?
There's an interesting history behind that question. When the airplane was originally designed, it was thought to be kind of a stopgap in the 1960s between supersonic transports. So they really designed the airplane rather, as an afterthought. They thought it would immediately be relegated to cargo after the supersonic transport took over. So the airplane was designed to carry cargo specifically in mind. The airplane was designed around its opening nose door so they could front load cargo. And in order to facilitate this, they put the flight deck on the second level. So the eye height of the pilot is 35 feet above the ground, which presents a number of unique challenges. And in the original design of the airplane, there was doubt that a pilot could even fly from that height, but they quickly realized that wouldn't be an issue.
So that means that when you touch down, especially you are more than 35 feet up in the air, so your vision, your sight picture is very, very different than, let's say, on a Boeing 737 or a smaller jet.
Absolutely. The technique used to land the airplane takes a bit of getting used to because of this as well. It really does feel like you're flying a building around while you're flaring the airplane. It can be very challenging, but one gets used to this pretty quickly.
I must assume that that's the case because once you fly it more, and I assume, and we'll get into it later, that it's going to take you several hours or several years of experience to become a pilot of a 747. By that time, you're used to the sight picture.
Mostly true. Occasionally, the airplane will surprise you and you don't land quite as softly as you'd like to, but the sight picture does become second nature in time.
Yeah, so interesting. I flew in a Airbus A380 at least once on the upper deck, and that for people who don't know, it's got a upper deck and a lower deck, and the upper deck is the entire length of the airplane, unlike in a Boeing 747 where the upper deck is restricted to just the forward part of it. Now, in that plane, the captain or the cockpit is actually on the lower deck, not on the upper deck.
Yes, the airplane wasn't designed with cargo in mind as a primary role, as the 747 was. So there is no nose door, for example, on the A380. It was never designed to load cargo in the front, so it wasn't required.
So that must be the biggest differentiating factor, that they designed this airplane primarily for cargo. At least that's what they thought, because the Concorde was flying at that time and that'll be supersonic. And they probably thought that's going to revolutionize intercontinental flying. And then you just need this big giant airplanes, the jumbo jet, to transport cargo and freight.
Exactly. Boeing was under the impression that their supersonic transport would be the be all end all in aviation, and the 747 would last 6 months to a year before being phased out. And that was quite the opposite became true.
Yeah. Did Boeing ever make a supersonic jet? I'm not aware of it, at least not a passenger jet.
The model number escapes me. It was a riff on the 707, I think maybe 2707. At any
Okay.
rate, it never went beyond the wooden mock-up stage. But if you get on a search engine and look for the Boeing supersonic transport, it was quite a project, and even the mock-up was beautiful to look at, but nothing became of it for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it'll be great if one of our viewers can comment on if they know something more about the Boeing supersonic, because we know about the Concorde, which came from the Airbus side of things. Tell me a little bit, whether you're flying passengers or cargo, typically how big is the crew? How many pilots are in there? And do you guys have like flight attendants too?
Yes to all. So occasionally we have just a two-person crew when flight times allow it. For a short flight, it will be the same crew as you would have on any domestic airliner. For a long-haul flight, we'll have two relief crew, sometimes two captains on board even. But generally, it's one captain with three first officers, and sometimes on a cargo flight, we'll also carry supporting crew such as load masters or special handlers. So the aircraft can get quite crowded on a long flight. It's a large airplane that becomes a very small airplane on 18-hour flights.
At any given point, there are like 2 or 3 people in the cockpit, and the rest of them are in some break area, I assume?
Yes, the crew complement for a longer flight being 4 pilots. There are facilities on board the airplane to provide quite a lot of comforts for us when the airplane isn't full. There's a place to make a full meal and even a private bunk for each of the crew members to get a full night's sleep. It's not uncommon on an 18-hour flight for crew members to have a full 8 hours of sleep in a private bunk. It's actually quite comfortable.
That's very interesting. We did an episode that I will put a link on with a flight attendant for a major airline. And she was talking about how there are the cabin crew rest areas, sometimes above the cabin through the secret doors. So I assume in your case, it's not that secret, especially if you're flying freight and cargo.
The configuration is very different depending on the sort of aircraft that you're flying. A passenger aircraft has got a different, and in my opinion, sometimes less comfortable facility for crew rest as opposed to the cargo variant, which has a dedicated and very comfortable place to sleep. The flight attendants on a passenger flight are stuck in the tail of the airplane. They've got what almost amounts to a hostel in the back of the airplane where 6 or 7 people sleep in a hidden compartment.
It's going to be different than a typical passenger flight with rows and rows of seats, or are they organized, I don't know, like a Air Force One kind of fancy, all decked up?
Throughout the industry, there's different configurations. There are VIP configurations, like you mentioned, where the airplane is all business class or even nicer in some cases. And then there's also a high density capacity as well. So a 747 can carry uh, almost 500 people in a high density capacity or more, I'm sure in some cases. And then in a VIP configuration, maybe as few as 200 people on occasion.
I assume that if you're carrying a sporting team or something like that, like a football team, and so you're going to have the whole complement of team, and therefore you need to fit a lot more passengers.
The support staff, when carrying VIP charters, can be pretty extensive. They're usually configured in a lower capacity, more comfortable format, though.
You mentioned there are flight attendants on board, especially when you have passengers. So, do they have the same kind of cooking galley type arrangements, serving hot meals and everything else?
Absolutely. The catering could be extravagant on some of these flights where the VIP passengers have high expectations. The same facilities exist as any passenger airplane that you would expect. Numerous galleys throughout the airplane, and it's a standard passenger 747.
Yeah, by the way, we should mention that Air Force One is based on a 747 chassis.
I think that's correct. I'll never have a chance to fly that particular.
I never flown a jet, so obviously flying 747 is daunting. Tell me a little bit about perks. What are the biggest advantages of being a pilot in this environment?
From a pilot's perspective, the challenge of flying globally with an enormous airplane to any destination in all weather at all times of day offers the biggest reward, in my opinion.
In what way?
The sites that you're afforded are very unique, and the challenges of flying into airports throughout the world with different procedures can be very rewarding as well with proper preparation.
Okay, so that's kind of interesting because you're going into these places, international different laws, ICAO laws, as we call it, International Civil Aviation Organization. And so the procedures are different. So you need to be up on top. And that, as a pilot, is kind of challenging and rewarding at the same time.
Absolutely. And it places extra emphasis on the need for a 3 or 4 pilot crew. It's amazing how many things we've got to pay attention to on a given approach. And there's quite a lot to pay attention to, whether it be weather, diversions, terrain, traffic, even a language barrier with air traffic controls can sometimes present challenges. So everybody has to be well versed on the rules and the differences in airspace. For example, flying into Hong Kong, just north of Hong Kong is Chinese airspace, which is governed under entirely different set of rules from ICAO. So if diversions become necessary, very quickly the entire crew has to adapt a different operational mindset in minutes.
I'm curious, what is the, I don't know, most exotic or fanciest place you have been to that you can recollect? And what is the most challenging airport? Is Hong Kong one of the most challenging airports to fly into?
Hong Kong offers enormous challenges, although I will say the operations team is so accommodating that it reduces the stress of the complexity of the arrival. But there are an enormous number of threats flying into Hong Kong, which I've mentioned. Terrain and weather, it can be quite daunting if one isn't prepared to make that arrival. Throughout the world, I would say uh, there are a number of airports that offer challenges. Sydney, Australia is one of my favorite airports to fly into. There's often enormous crosswinds off the ocean, and the beautiful views on the arrival are very rewarding as well over the ocean with rugged terrain.
Now, do you get to see the sights and be a tourist, or are you kind of flying in and a few hours later you're out and therefore all you see is the airport and the hotel?
We have a substantial amount of time in our layover destinations, anywhere from 3 or 4 days on occasion, down to minimum rest of 15 hours.
So you do get to see the sights. You can be a tourist if you so choose to.
Absolutely. You can have a free vacation relatively often.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What's the challenges now of being in this career?
The most challenging aspects of the job, I would say, for me are the planning of rest. Rest can be extremely challenging. The aircraft will fly 18 or 19 hours across multiple time zones. You can watch the sunrise and set during the course of a flight almost two times. So it can be very difficult to adapt the body clock and find proper rest if you don't plan this out in advance.
And I assume that now that you've been doing it for several years, that there's certain routine or certain ways that you adapt to this.
Everybody finds their own technique to deal with rest issues. Some people adopt the concept of simply doing what the body tells them to do. Others plan their rest out based on uh, their clock at home, for example, which is a technique that I subscribe to. I tried to do everything in relation to what the clock on the wall back at home says, just so I have a baseline to compare my body clock to.
So that I think that's fascinating because as a traveler, so when I go somewhere, let's say I'm going from here to Singapore or Japan, and I'm not going there for 18 hours, I'm going there for maybe 5 days a week or whatever. So what I do is that as soon as the plane takes off, I set my clock to the new time and I start acclimating my body to as if I'm already there. And then when I come back, I do the reverse. So it sounds like you kind of have a different technique.
For example, on a single trip pairing, so in the course of maybe 7 days, you can fly from maybe Chicago, for example, in the United States to Japan, and then spend maybe 30, 32 hours in Japan, then continue on to Kazakhstan, and then from Kazakhstan continue on to Europe with minimal layovers in between. So if you acclimate to one of these time zones, it could actually be detrimental.
Yeah, I can see that. That is, I never thought about it, but that makes perfect sense that you are kind of like a time traveler, literally, and then you don't want to keep changing to the time zone you're in. So you kind of live the US time and then let the body deal with it, which should be weird because you're probably eating Cheerios at like 2 a.m.
You find yourself in very interesting predicaments trying to manage your rest properly. And for example, I'm at 14 hours in the future right now here in Singapore as compared to where you are. So, I suppose it is accurate to say that we are time travelers.
My understanding, Doug, is that you have like a schedule that's 15 days on when you're traveling and then 15 days you're home. Is that right?
Roughly correct. Throughout the industry, there are different models. I would say one should expect to be gone longer than an airline pilot flying domestically for one of the major airlines. Our schedule does happen to be 15 days on, 15 days off. Whether you choose to do that in 7 day increments or if you choose to do that all at once is up to the pilot. It can be very challenging as well to be away for so long, but it's also very rewarding to have so much time off. Monthly, you can plan your time off almost like a vacation for most people in the States.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the flight attendant said to us in the episode that we did with Gretchen a while ago. That it's hard to be away, especially when you have young children. It's always difficult. But when you come home and the family is somewhat independent, you see the progress. And then when you're home, you're home. You're so vested in that. I can see sort of that being both a challenge and sort of a rewarding experience at the same time.
Very much so. It does require independence on the part of the family because you are absolutely unable to affect any of the problems at home directly for that 15-day period. When you're home, you're completely undistracted. There's no work for those 15 days.
And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the career, how you got into it, and what advice you have for anybody who's seeking a career in this industry. But I do have a request for people who are watching and listening. If you fly cargo or these kind of long haul international routes, or if you know people who do, let us know what kind of technique they use with different time zone or what challenges they see, what perks they see. It'll be fascinating to read those comments. So, Doug, let's talk a little bit about how did you get into this? You are only like one of two or three people that I know who have pursued this long haul international, especially cargo type flying in a non-airline setting. So how did you get into it?
My training was through civilian training solely. So I did my private training, my instrument training, commercial, multi-engine, and at that time, the ATP was not yet required to begin airline training. So I received my ATP in my first airline job. I
An
flew for the
ATP
regional.
is airline transport pilot, so that's the level that you need to be to become a pilot of a airline.
Correct. And after my civilian training, I worked for a decade with the regional airline industry
Okay.
and was well established, but realized after speaking to a friend that there might be something over the horizon that was a little more interesting. I've always enjoyed international travel and I've always admired heavy jets. I think every pilot secretly wants to fly a heavy jet at some time in their career, whether they admit it or not. So after a few conversations with pilots working in this industry, I decided this might be the path for me. I will fully admit that going into this career path, I did not understand fully what I was up against until I'd already become a pilot in this industry.
If I understand this correctly, your initial training is similar to any initial training that any pilot goes through. So you become a private pilot, then you become an instrument rated private pilot, then you become a commercial rated pilot, then you become a airline transport rated pilot. That part is exactly the same whether you pursue a airline route or a corporate jet flying, or in your case, this cargo and ACMI flying.
Absolutely. That's at least one way that you can find yourself in this position. Another route would be to have your training done through the military. We also have pilots from all around the world who do their training in a slightly different way according to their country's trajectory as well.
Let's say you have your basic 1,200 hours or 1,500 hours or whatever the requirements are, you can then make a deliberate decision as to which way you want your career to go. So, did you make that decision deliberately, or you kind of stumbled on this route and then figured out the what this world is?
I'd like to think I made it deliberately, but one doesn't always understand exactly what the ramifications of their decisions will be.
What would you say is the biggest differences, let's say, between somebody who pursues a, shall I say, a traditional airline pilot route, which is, at least in the US, you go fly for a regional commuter airlines and then you graduate into a bigger major airline. Typically, you start as a first officer and then you get promoted to a captain. What are the kind of biggest differences?
The domestic airline companies in the States offer maybe a bit more stability where it comes to family life, time at home. Compensation can be a little better in some cases, but it is somewhat more routine, I would say. You tend to fly to the same destinations on a more regular basis. I've never flown for a major airline, so I can't speak to it directly, but from my acquaintances who do, they seem to find that part very rewarding. For folks on the ACMI side, it seems that we're trying to avoid that sort of thing. We more prefer our large chunks of time all at once, either at work or at home. And we almost prefer the chaos of the operation where I'll pack my bag prior to leaving home, not knowing if I need shorts or a parka. I have no idea where I'm going. I just know that I'm leaving for 15 days, and when I come back, I'll have a story to tell.
I think that's great. I'm glad you chose to pursue this thing. Now, do you have any advice or recommendation? Let's say somebody who's younger, just starting their pilot training. What would you say for those who want to pursue a route like what you have?
I would say it can be very difficult to choose which route you want to take until you've experienced a little bit of everything. So my advice is to speak to as many people in the industry as you can and find folks who seem to enjoy what they do for a living and really ask them what they enjoy so much about it. And also seek out people who tend to not enjoy it so much and maybe try to understand what it is exactly about their career path that they have regrets about. In my case, I did not excel in the regional world. I didn't enjoy it. as much as I enjoy this world, I find this world very fascinating, constantly challenging. There's no routine to it whatsoever, which I think is just thrilling on a regular basis. Whereas I didn't have that feeling as much flying into maybe Chicago to Cleveland on a regular basis.
So, in the airline world, there are websites and career sites, and there's a pecking order. Like I said, you go into regional airlines, and so you can apply for the jobs and get through the training, get certified for the bigger and bigger aircraft. Is there a similar pathway, somewhat of a well defined pathway in your world?
The information is out there. I would say it's not as well documented because our companies tend to be smaller and somewhat behind the radar. But if you have interest in learning more about this sort of flying, the information is certainly out there for you to find.
Okay, so Google search is your friend. There's information to be found, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And there are a few social media creators on YouTube or on other platforms that document in some detail what the lifestyle is like.
So, how long have you been doing this? And any big takeaways or any regrets that you have of having done this?
I've been in this world for almost a decade after leaving my previous world in the regional industry for a decade. So I can compare the two side by side. And for me, there's no question that this has been more thrilling and more rewarding. We've been all over the world and we'll continue to travel the world, never knowing where we're going to go next, finding new surprises and challenges around every corner. So I find that very rewarding.
I would like to invite our viewers, especially if you're in the airline world or in this cargo ACMI world, to go and write in the comments, what do you think? What are the kind of the pluses and minuses? Because we would love to read the comments, and we can highlight the best ones in the future episode. Doug, I want to shift gears a tiny bit. Now, in addition to being a pilot of a 747, like you said, sitting up 35 feet from the ground, you also fly little teeny bitty airplanes. You have a tailwheel airplane that you own and fly for pleasure. And you're also a glider pilot. And as a glider pilot and a tailwheel pilot, you're sitting so low to the ground, totally opposite of a 35 feet up. Is that a big adjustment for you from flying a 747 to a glider where your backside is literally scraping on the ground?
The experiences are completely separate, but both very rewarding. There is very little time to fly the jumbo jet by hand. A lot of times in flight, you're simply cruising for 18 hours with the autopilot on, and you get to fly at the beginning and the end of the flight, maybe for the first and last 15 minutes. So that's where general aviation pays dividends in my life. I go to the airport and there is no autopilot and no complex avionics. So I seek that out to reconnect with my stick and rudder skills. And I find both are very rewarding in different ways. But I sometimes prefer flying the tail dragger around rather than listening to air traffic control in my headset or soaring up a thermal and really just enjoying the sheer thrill of the experience.
Yeah, I got to say that you're not the first one to say that. I fly a lot as a flight instructor, I fly with airline pilots, but they really enjoy flying small 1 seat, 2 seat, 4 seat general aviation airplanes as a complement to their big jets. And I think that I can see the exuberance, the happiness, the sheer pleasure of flying something very, let's say, primitive as opposed to your fancy flying machine.
I think we're all very lucky in aviation, those of us who enjoy general aviation as well, to have found something that we can be so passionate about both as a career and a hobby.
Doug, thank you so much for joining and talking to us about this. I learned a lot. This is not a world I know a lot about. So I'm going to invite people who are watching. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, or if you're in this world, let us know.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
This is